The day everything fell apart started like any normal workday. I arrived early, placed my bag under my desk, and opened my laptop. The office was quiet. Only a few lights were on, and the cleaning staff were still finishing their work. I like mornings like that. Quiet, peaceful, no pressure. But by lunchtime, my entire career was about to collapse. It started with a message from my supervisor. Come to the meeting room. Now! That alone made my stomach tighten. Meetings without warning were rarely good news. When I entered the room, 3 senior managers were already sitting there. Their faces looked serious. I knew immediately something was wrong. Sit down, one of them said. I did. A printed report was lying on the table. My report, the same financial analysis I had submitted 2 weeks earlier. One of them pushed the papers toward me. Can you explain this? He asked. I looked at the numbers. My heart skipped. The report showed a large financial loss connected to several transactions. Transactions that I had approved. That's not possible, I said quietly. Another manager leaned forward. These approvals came from your system login. I felt the room spin slightly. I didn't authorize those payments, I said. But the records say you did, he replied. Silence filled the room. In that moment, I understood something terrible. Someone had used my access to move money, and now it looked like I was responsible. The investigation began immediately. My computer was taken. My office access was suspended. Security staff escorted me out of the building like I was a criminal. The walk through the office felt endless. People stared as I passed. Some whispered. Others simply looked shocked. By the time I reached the elevator, the rumors had already started. Fraud, financial theft, internal investigation. My phone started vibrating with messages from coworkers. Is everything okay? What happened? I didn't answer any of them, because the truth was simple. I had no idea what was happening. That evening I sat alone in my apartment staring at the printed documents they had given me. The transactions were real. Large payments had been sent to unfamiliar vendors, and every single approval was connected to my login credentials. But something else bothered me, the timestamps. Many of the approvals happened late at night, sometimes after midnight. I was never working at those hours. That detail gave me a small piece of hope. If someone used my login while I wasn't even in the office, then the truth might still be proven. But proving it would not be easy, because once people believe you are guilty, they stop looking for other answers. And right now, everyone believed the fraud was mine. The next morning, I received a call from the Human Resources Department. They told me I was placed on administrative leave while the investigation continued. In simple words, that meant I was not fired yet, but I was very close. The woman on the phone sounded polite, but distant. Please cooperate with the investigators, she said. I will, I replied. When the call ended, I felt a mix of anger and fear. Someone had stolen money, and somehow they had used my identity to do it. That meant 2 things were true. First, I was being blamed. Second, the real thief was still inside the company. I opened my laptop and began reviewing my personal records. Old emails, calendar entries, work messages. I needed to remember exactly what happened during those weeks. Slowly a pattern began to appear. Several of the suspicious transactions happened during nights when I was clearly at home. I even had messages sent from my phone during those same hours. Proof that I was in the office. But that still didn't explain how someone used my access. Unless they had access to the system itself. That thought made my chest tighten. If the fraud involved someone with high-level system permissions, then this was much bigger than I first thought. And if that person realized I was starting to investigate, things could become very dangerous. 2 days later, the investigators finally called me in for questioning. The meeting took place in a small conference room inside the building. Returning to the office felt strange. People looked away when they saw me walking through the hallway. Others watched quietly. I could almost hear the whispers forming behind my back. Inside the room, 2 investigators sat across from me. They asked many questions. Where was I during the nights of the transactions? Who had access to my system login? Did I share my password with anyone? The last question made me shake my head immediately. Never, I said. They wrote notes but showed little emotion. Then they showed me something new, security footage. The video showed someone using my workstation late at night. The figure sat in my chair, typing on my computer. My heart began pounding. "Can you identify this person?" one investigator asked. I leaned closer to the screen, but the lighting was poor. The camera angle was distant. The face was hidden in shadow. "I can't see clearly," I said. The investigator paused. "Unfortunately, the camera does not capture facial details," he explained. Of course it didn't. Whoever planned this had chosen the perfect moment. Late at night, empty office, weak camera angles. It was a carefully designed trap, and I had walked straight into it. That night, I realized something important. If I waited for the company investigators to clear my name, I might lose everything first. Investigations moved slowly, but accusations spread fast. Already some coworkers had stopped replying to my messages. My reputation was falling apart. If I wanted the truth revealed, I needed to find it myself. So I started with the only evidence I had, the transaction records. I printed every suspicious payment and laid the pages across my living room table. One detail caught my attention. The vendors receiving the money were unfamiliar, but their names followed a strange pattern. Short names, very simple, almost like temporary accounts. That made me curious. So I searched public business records. What I found shocked me. Several of those companies had been created only weeks before receiving payments, and all of them listed the same registration address. A small office building on the edge of the city. That discovery changed everything, because it meant the fraud wasn't random. Someone had created fake companies to receive stolen money, and that person had carefully used my identity to approve the payments. But the deeper I looked, the more it felt like someone powerful was behind the scheme. The next morning, I drove to the address listed for the fake companies. The building stood on a quiet street far from the busy business district. It was old and plain, with faded paint and a small parking lot. From the outside, nothing looked suspicious. But according to the records, several companies receiving large payments were registered here. That didn't make sense. I walked inside. A small sign listed the businesses located in the building. Most of them looked normal. But none of the vendor names from the payment records appeared anywhere on the board. That made my heart beat faster. Either the companies had moved recently, or the address was being used as a fake registration. A receptionist sat behind a small desk near the entrance. I walked over and asked casually, "Do you know if any businesses here use temporary office space?" She thought for a moment. "Sometimes people rent mailing addresses here," she said, "just for paperwork." My stomach tightened. A mailing address. That was exactly what someone would use for fake companies. "Do you know who manages those rentals?" I asked. She pointed down the hall. "There's an office at the end." I thanked her and walked slowly in that direction. Every step felt heavier, because if someone inside my company created these fake vendors, then this address might connect directly to them. But when I reached the office, the door was locked, and the sign on the door said something strange. "Office closed for renovation." I stood in the hallway staring at the locked door. Renovation. That felt like a convenient excuse, especially when several companies connected to stolen money were registered at this address. I took a photo of the door with my phone. Then I returned to the reception desk. "Do you know when this office closed?" I asked. The receptionist looked unsure. "Maybe a few weeks ago," she said. That timeline matched something important. The same weeks when the suspicious payments began. My mind started racing. If someone created those fake companies and then shut down the office quickly, they were trying to erase their tracks. That meant one thing. The person behind the fraud was careful. Very careful. On the drive home, I kept thinking about the investigation. The company believed the fraud came from my system login, but the evidence I had found suggested a much larger plan. Fake companies, temporary addresses, late-night transactions. Someone had built this scheme step by step. When I reached my apartment building, I noticed something unusual. A black car sat parked across the street. The engine was running, and someone inside seemed to be watching the entrance. For a moment, I wondered if I was imagining things. But as I walked toward my building, the driver looked directly at me. Then the car slowly pulled away. My heart started beating faster, because that moment made one thing clear. Someone knew I was asking questions. That night, I could not sleep. My mind kept returning to the black car. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the driver was simply waiting for someone. But deep down, I knew the truth. Someone was watching me. The next morning, I called the only person I trusted inside the company, a friend who worked in the technology department. I explained everything: the fake vendors, the address, the suspicious car. There was a long silence on the phone. Finally, he said quietly, "This sounds bigger than we thought." "I know." He hesitated before speaking again. "If someone inside the system created those approvals using your login, there might be traces in the server logs." That gave me hope. "Can you check?" I asked. "I can try," he replied. "But if someone powerful is involved, looking into this could cause trouble." I understood the risk, but I had already been blamed for fraud. Things couldn't get much worse. Later that afternoon, he called me back. His voice sounded tense. "I found something strange," he said. "What is it?" "The login sessions connected to your account. They came from a remote server." My chest tightened. "A remote server?" "Yes. That means someone accessed the system without even using your physical computer." That discovery changed everything, because it meant the person behind the fraud had technical knowledge and access to internal systems, which meant the real thief was almost certainly inside the company. My friend sent me a screenshot of the server log. The details were clear. Several financial approvals connected to my account came from a remote login. The IP address traced back to a server used by the company's internal network. That meant someone inside the building had used it. I studied the timestamps carefully. Late night activity. Sometimes after midnight, just like the investigators had shown me earlier. But something else caught my attention. The remote sessions were not random. They always happened on specific days. Days when a certain senior manager worked late in the office. I felt my hands grow cold, because that manager was responsible for overseeing financial operations. If anyone had access to system privileges and transaction approvals, it would be someone in that position. But accusing someone that powerful without solid proof would destroy me completely. I needed stronger evidence. Something undeniable. Something that connected the fake vendors directly to someone inside the company. Later that evening, I checked the payment records again. One small detail suddenly stood out. The bank account receiving the stolen money had a routing number from a small regional bank. That bank had a public branch just a few blocks from the office, which meant something important. If the accounts were open locally, someone might have visited that branch in person. And banks usually keep security footage. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt a spark of hope, because somewhere out there, the real thief had left a trace. The next day, I walked past the bank branch quietly. I didn't enter. Instead, I stood across the street, watching the entrance. If someone inside the company had opened those accounts, they might have visited the bank more than once. But I couldn't just walk inside and demand records. Banks don't share that information easily. Still, I noticed something interesting. A security camera pointed directly toward the entrance. Anyone entering the bank would appear clearly on that footage, which meant investigators could request it if they had the right reason. The problem was simple. Right now, the investigators believed I was a thief, so they were not looking for anyone else. That meant I had to give them a reason to look deeper. When I returned home, I organized every piece of evidence I collected: the fake company addresses, the remote login records, the suspicious vendor accounts, the timeline of transactions. Everything pointed toward a carefully planned scheme. But there was one final step. I needed to present the information in a way investigators could not ignore. Late that night, I finished writing a detailed report. It explained how someone had used remote access to perform the transactions. It connected the fake companies to the same address, and it showed how the money moved through a local bank account. When I finished, I stared at the screen. Sending this report could change everything. Either it would expose the truth, or it would make the real criminal realize exactly how much I knew. The next morning, I sent the report to the investigators. My finger hovered over the send button for several seconds before I clicked it. Once the message left my computer, There was no turning back. Either they would take the information seriously, or they would ignore it completely. The rest of the day passed slowly. I kept checking my phone for a response. Nothing came. Late that evening, I stepped outside to take a walk. My mind needed fresh air after hours of thinking. The street was quiet, but halfway down the block, I noticed something familiar. The same black car. It was parked under a streetlight. This time the windows were darker, and I could not see the driver clearly, but the engine was running. I kept walking, pretending not to notice. As I passed the car, I felt someone watching me. My chest tightened. When I reached the corner, I turned back for a quick glance. The car was still there, still waiting. That night's sleep came slowly. Around midnight, I heard a faint sound near my apartment door. A small click. My eyes opened immediately. I sat up quietly and listened. Another sound followed. Someone was trying to open the door. My heart began pounding. For a moment, I stayed completely still, listening carefully. The handle moved slightly. Whoever stood outside was testing the lock. I reached for my phone and quietly moved closer to the door. The hallway light under the doorframe cast a faint shadow. A person was definitely standing there. After several seconds, the handle stopped moving. Then the footsteps slowly faded down the hallway. I waited another minute before opening the door carefully. The hallway was empty, but something on the floor caught my attention. A small envelope. No writing, no stamp, just plain paper. I picked it up and opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet with a short message. Stop asking questions. My stomach turned cold. The threat was clear. Someone knew I was investigating, and they wanted me to stop. I closed the door and locked it again. For the rest of the night, I could not sleep. The message repeated in my mind again and again. Stop asking questions. But the threat had the opposite effect. Instead of scaring me away, it confirmed something important. The real thief was worried. If they felt comfortable enough to threaten me, it meant the investigation was getting close. And that meant I was getting closer to the truth. The next morning, I received a reply from the investigators. They asked me to come in for another meeting. This time, the tone of the message felt different, less suspicious, more curious. When I arrived at the building, the investigators greeted me with serious expressions. One of them placed my report on the table. "We reviewed the information you sent," he said, and he looked at his partner before answering. "The remote login evidence is very important." Relief slowly filled my chest. "For weeks we believed the transactions were made directly from your workstation," he continued. "But the server logs suggest otherwise." I nodded. "Someone used remote access." "Yes." He tapped the report. "We are now expanding the investigation." For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt hope, but the investigator was not finished speaking. "There is another detail we discovered this morning." My attention sharpened. The bank accounts receiving the stolen funds were opened using identification documents. "So," I asked. He looked directly at me. "The identification used your name." My heart dropped again. Someone had not only used my system login, they had also used my identity to open bank accounts. The trap had been carefully planned. Someone wanted every piece of evidence pointing directly at me. The investigators continued asking questions for another hour. They wanted to know if I had ever lost personal documents or shared identification details with anyone. I tried to remember, but nothing stood out. My documents had always been safe, which meant the thief probably created fake identification. That realization made the situation even more disturbing. Whoever planned this had prepared everything in advance. Fake companies, remote system access, false identity documents. The level of planning suggested something serious. This was not a random crime. It was a carefully designed scheme. Before I left the meeting, one investigator shared new information. "We requested security footage from the bank branch," he said. My attention sharpened. If someone opened the accounts in person, we might identify them. That was exactly the evidence I had hoped for. But there was still a problem. If the person used fake identification, I said, they might have hidden their face. "That's possible," the investigator replied. "But cameras capture more than faces." "What do you mean?" Height, body movement, clothing patterns, vehicles, even small details could become useful. When I left the building, my thoughts felt clearer than they had in weeks. The investigation was finally moving in the right direction. But as I stepped outside, I noticed something again. Across the street, the same black car. This time I stopped walking. Instead of pretending not to notice, I looked directly at the car. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the driver slowly started the engine. The car pulled away and disappeared down the street. My chest felt tight. Someone was still watching me. But the investigation was now growing bigger, and that meant the thief might become desperate. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was my friend from the technology department. His voice sounded tense. "I found something else in the server logs," he said. "What is it?" "The remote login used a special admin permission." That detail made my heart skip. Admin access was limited to only a few people in the entire company. How many employees have that level of access? I asked. "Very few," he replied. "Less than 5. My mind raced. If only a handful of people had the technical ability to perform the fraud, the list of suspects was suddenly very small. But the truth was also frightening. Every one of those people held powerful positions. Accusing someone like that without perfect evidence could destroy my life permanently. Still, the pieces were finally coming together. And somewhere inside the company, the real criminal was starting to realize that the truth was slowly closing in. 2 days later, the investigators called again. This time, their voices sounded serious but focused. "We received the bank security footage." One of them said. My heart started beating faster. "And there's someone on the video opening the account. Can you see the face?" "Not clearly," he replied. That answer disappointed me for a moment, but he continued speaking. "The person wore a cap and kept their head down. However, we noticed something interesting." I leaned forward in my chair. "What is it?" "The person arrived in a company vehicle." My eyes widened. "A company vehicle?" "Yes." The parking camera captured the license plate clearly. That detail changed everything, because company vehicles were assigned to only a few departments, and the records would show exactly who used that vehicle on that day. Later that afternoon, the investigators called again. This time their tone was even more serious. The vehicle was signed out by a senior manager. My chest tightened. A senior manager had access to company vehicles, access to internal systems, and enough authority to avoid suspicion. The pieces were starting to fit together, but there was still one problem. "That doesn't prove the manager opened the account," I said. "You're right," the investigator replied. "We still need stronger evidence." The investigation was finally moving toward the truth, but powerful people rarely fall easily, and something told me the real storm was only beginning. The office atmosphere changed quickly after that. Whispers spread through the hallways again. But this time the rumors were different. Instead of talking about me, people were quietly discussing the investigation itself. Some employees noticed senior leaders holding private meetings. Others saw security staff reviewing records late into the evening. The company was clearly searching for answers. Meanwhile, I stayed mostly at home, waiting for updates. One afternoon, my friend from the technology department called again. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "What happened?" "The admin account used for the remote logins." "Yes." "It was access from a private office." My chest tightened. "Which office?" He hesitated before answering. "One belonging to the same senior manager connected to the vehicle." The room felt suddenly silent. The evidence was stacking up. Vehicle records, remote system access, bank account activity, all pointing toward the same person. But my friend sounded worried. "This situation is dangerous," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" "That manager holds a lot of influence inside the company." He was right. Accusing someone that powerful required undeniable proof. Otherwise, the accusation could easily be dismissed. Still, the truth was becoming harder to hide. And somewhere inside the company, the person responsible was likely realizing the investigation was closing in. 3 days later, I received another call from the investigators. "We need you to come to the office again," they said. When I arrived, the mood in the room felt very different. The investigators looked serious but confident. One of them placed several photos on the table. "These are still images from the bank footage," he explained. I studied them carefully. The person's face was still hidden by a cap, but something else stood out. A ring on the person's hand. A large silver ring with a dark stone. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because we noticed something during our internal interviews." He turned another photo toward me. It showed the same senior manager we suspected earlier, and on his hand, the exact same ring. My breath caught. "That can't be a coincidence," I said. The investigator nodded. "We agree. It was not perfect proof yet, but it was a strong connection." The investigators continued gathering evidence, financial records, vehicle logs, system activity. Every piece added weight to the same conclusion. The person who framed me was slowly being exposed. But the case was not finished. And powerful people often make desperate decisions when they realize they are about to be caught. Later that evening, something unexpected happened. I received a call from a number I did not recognize. I answered carefully. A calm voice spoke. "You should stop cooperating with the investigators." My heart started racing. "Who is this?" I asked. The voice ignored my question. "This situation can still end quietly," it continued. "All you have to do is admit the fraud." The word shocked me. Why would I do that? I replied, "You would receive a reduced penalty." The voice said, "and the matter would disappear quickly." For a moment I could not speak. The person on the phone was offering a deal that would protect the real criminal. "No," I said firmly. The voice grew colder. "Think carefully," it said. "Sometimes the truth creates bigger problems than silence." Then the call ended. My hands were shaking slightly. The threat was clear. Someone was desperate enough to try convincing me to take the blame. But that call also confirmed something important. The investigation was getting dangerously close to the truth. The following morning, the investigators called with urgent news. "We are preparing formal charges," one of them said. "For the senior manager?" "Yes." My chest filled with relief. But the investigator continued. "We also need you to attend a final meeting." When I arrived at the office, several senior leaders were present. The investigators explained everything. Vehicle records, remote system access, fake companies, bank accounts, security footage. The evidence formed a clear timeline. The senior manager had used administrative system access to approve payments using my login credentials. Then fake companies were created to receive the stolen money. Finally, the accounts were opened using false identification under my name. The entire scheme had been designed to frame me from the beginning. One leader looked directly at me. "You were meant to take the fall for everything." I nodded slowly. But now the truth had finally surfaced. The trap that was built around me was collapsing, and the person who created it was about to face the consequences. The following week, the entire office felt tense. People moved through the hallways quietly. Conversations stopped when certain managers walked by. Everyone knew something serious was happening. That morning, I was asked to return to the building again. When I entered the conference room, several investigators were already there. A few minutes later, the senior manager we suspected was brought into the room. For the first time, I saw the person who had almost destroyed my life sitting only a few feet away. The investigators began presenting the evidence step by step. First, they showed the vehicle records, the company car used to visit the bank. Next, they showed the remote system logs, the login activity that used my account from an administrator terminal. Then, they presented the bank footage, the image with the silver ring. The manager tried to remain calm, but I could see tension growing in the room. Finally, the investigators placed the last document on the table, a record of financial transfers linking the stolen money to a private account controlled by that same manager. The room went silent. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the investigators asked a simple question. "Do you want to explain this?" The manager looked around the room slowly, but there was no explanation left. The truth was finally standing in the open, and the person who built the trap for me had nowhere left to hide. The arrest happened later that day. Security officers arrived quietly and escorted the manager out of the building. Many employees watched from their desks as the situation unfolded. The whispers returned, but this time the story was very different. Now, people were learning that the fraud had never been mine. The real thief had been hiding in a powerful position all along. Over the next few days, investigators uncovered even more details. The scheme had been running for nearly 2 years. Small payments were sent to fake vendors again and again. Each payment looked ordinary by itself, but over time the total amount grew into millions. The manager had created the fake companies using temporary addresses. Then the money was moved through bank accounts opened under false identities. My identity, the plan was simple. If the fraud was discovered, the evidence would lead straight to me. The investigators later explained something chilling. The manager had chosen me because I worked closely with financial reports. That made it easy to blame the missing money on my work. Hearing that explanation made my stomach turn. For months, I believed the situation was a terrible accident, but it had never been an accident. It had been a carefully planned trap, and I had almost become the perfect scapegoat. Several months later, the case went to court. By that time, the investigators had gathered overwhelming evidence: financial records, system logs, bank footage, witness statements. Everything pointed clearly to the same person. During the trial, I was asked to explain how I discovered the suspicious payments. Standing in the courtroom felt strange. Only months earlier, I had been treated like the criminal. Now I was explaining the truth to the judge. I described the moment I first noticed the missing funds, the strange vendor names, the late-night transactions, the evidence that didn't match my work hours. The defense tried to suggest the situation was still unclear, but the technical evidence told a different story. Remote system access, fake identification documents, bank visits using company vehicles. Every piece of proof connected to the same person. After several days of testimony, the final decision came. The manager was found guilty of financial fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The sentence included many years in prison. When the verdict was announced, I felt something lift from my shoulders. For months, I had lived under suspicion. Now the truth was finally confirmed in front of everyone. Returning to work after the trial felt very different. People greeted me with respect instead of suspicion. Some coworkers even apologized for believing the rumors earlier. I didn't blame them. When evidence points in one direction, it is easy to believe the story being told. The leadership team also made major changes to the company systems. Financial approvals now required multiple levels of review. Remote system access became heavily restricted. Security monitoring increased across all departments. The company wanted to make sure nothing like this could happen again. One afternoon, a senior leader asked me to join a new internal review team. The role would focus on detecting unusual financial activity before it became a problem. In a strange way, the worst experience of my career had created a new path for my future. Instead of losing my job, I was now helping protect the company from fraud. My friend from the technology department laughed when I told him. From suspect to investigator, he said. I smiled. Life had taken a turn I never expected. But sometimes the hardest experiences teach the most valuable lessons. And this one had changed the way I looked at everything. Looking back now, the entire experience still feels unreal. There was a time when I believed my career was over. The fraud had been discovered, and every piece of evidence pointed directly at me. For weeks I lived with fear, anger, and confusion. But one thing kept me moving forward: the truth. The numbers in the report had never lied. Something had been wrong. And instead of ignoring that feeling, I kept asking questions. Those questions slowly uncovered the truth hiding behind the fraud. Fake companies, remote system access, a powerful person using my identity to steal millions. In the end, the trap built for me collapsed under the weight of its own lies. The person who framed me was exposed. Justice was served, and my name was cleared. But the biggest lesson stayed with me long after the trial ended. Sometimes the truth takes time to appear. Sometimes it hides behind powerful people and complicated plans. But if you keep searching, keep questioning, and refuse to accept lies as facts, the truth has a way of finding the light. The fraud was discovered. They pinned it on me. But in the end, the truth was finally revealed.